This is another nice color chart I stole from David Richards' book. Showing you the Cincinnatian area in the upper Ordovician. Again, the greater Cincinnati area was situated on the northern edge of this shallow marine positive area called the Lexington Platform that was situated at the eastern edge of the Laurentian continent, which is what we call North America in the Ordovician. In the Edenian, there were deeper water troughs to the well, it's the north. This area, in the Ordovician, this area would be tilted to the south, and then south. It was about 20-25 degrees south of the equator, and since that time, the North American continent's kind of rotated counterclockwise and moved north to its present position. So, to the west, or the Ordovician north, you have this sea bream trough, and then to the I guess this would be east, or east, Ordovician east, you had the Pennsylvania trough, and then you had this Appalachian foreland basin. You had other platforms, the Galena platform here in the Midwest, and then the Trenton platform in Ontario and up in New York State. To the east of the Lexington platform, you had the eastern edge of Laurentia collided with a series of volcanic island arcs in the late Ordovician, and it threw up this tectonic highland area, and as it eroded, sediments washed off of it and formed this Queenston Deltaic complex, which was a source of clastic sediments that filled in this basin here and eventually filled in these basins around here, were the sources of the clastic sediments coming into this, what in the earlier late Ordovician was largely a carbonate platform. And this is the standard Cincinnatian stratigraphic sequence. The Cincinnati series in this area is comprised of, as most of you probably know, cyclic packets of mudstones and skeletal limestones that most people believe represent alternating transgressive and regressive conditions across the Lexington platform. Mudstones are inferred to represent deeper, lower energy mud bottom at water depths below wave base for the most part, and limestones represent firmer skeletal substrates deposited in shallow water at or above the wave base. Based on this interpretation, you can divide the Cincinnati into three major packets, sediment packets, representing transgressive, regressive cycles. The T1R1 is this Edenian and Maysvillian sequence. Includes the basal coat formation, which is about 70% or more claystone. The Fairview Formation, which is about 50-50 limestone and shale. And then the Bellevue Formation in the Grant Lake, which caps the sequence, representing the regressive part of the sequence. And this is about 60% nodular grainstone or rudstone. And then you have a smaller, shorter sequence, the T2R2 sequence, which includes most of what we call the Grant Lake limestone, used to be called the McMillan Formation, where you have the Corryville member representing your transgressive sequence, clay shales with planar siltstones and packstones, the Mount Auburn with more skeletal waxstone and packstone, and then the Arnheim, which is the real oddball facies. It's actually an odd complex of facies, where you have a basal sequence of planar shales that grade upward into nodular limestones. And then finally, you have this T3R3 sequence in the Richmondian, with the basal transgressive unit being the Waynesville, which is mostly claystone, followed by the Bull Fork and Liberty, which is kind of a mix of claystone and limestone. And then the upper part of the Richmond is made up of a complex of increasingly shallower water facies represented by the fine-grained limestones, dolomitic limestones of the Saluda Formation to the west in southeast Indiana, these nodular weathering carbonates, limestones of the Whitewater Formation to the north, and then these grade eastward into these shallow water mudstone facies, these maroon and green mudstones of the Preachersville member of the Drakes Formation. And then the whole Cincinnatian sequence is truncated regionally by an erosional unconformity, which separates it from the overlying early Silurian Brassfield Formation. The bulk of the Cincinnati series exposed in the tri-state area, the T1 through T3 portions of the section, has a rather depauperate nautiloid fauna in terms of diversity, dominated by species assigned to the small pseudo-orthosaurid genus Treptoceros flower. It's usually associated with a similar looking actinoceuroid called Orthonibioceros in large endoceurids, which are probably belong to Camarasaurus, comprising what I termed in 1989 paper the Treptoceros camarasaurus fauna. This fauna is characteristic of the shallow marine clastic facies in the Cincinnatian. We find this fauna in the Cincinnati shelf area. We find it up here in the Georgian Bay and the Mayford formations in southern Ontario. We find it in the Lorraine group in New York, and we find it in the Nicolette River section up here in Quebec. So in this entire area here was a large shelf area that was primarily deeper water mud bottom environments through most of the Edenian, through the Maysvillian and early Richmondian parts of the section. To the north and the west are these carbonate platform facies. These supported a totally different nautiloid fauna that I call the Arctic Ordovician fauna. It was actually described initially by Firsty and then by Nelson in the late 50s. But it's characteristic of much of North America, going all the way from New Mexico to Wyoming, up into Manitoba, all through Arctic Canada, and up here into Greenland. The enormous carbonate platform facies. The Treptoceros camarasaurus fauna is most common in these muddy bottom, deeper water facies, possibly representing cooler water conditions than the succeeding shallower water Richmond carbonates. And these are some of the packets of nautiloid faunas that you find in the cope. We find Treptoceros, Camarasaurus, and Isoorthoceros, Trochilides occurring primarily in claystone facies. The basal part of the Fairview, we have Treptoceros and Camarasaurus. In some of the more carbonate part of the Fairview, you can get Orthonibioceros and some large Treptoceros. And then we get here in the Coreyville, Treptoceros, Camarasaurus, and some other oddball things. Treptoceros occurs up here in the Mount Auburn. Not very common in Arnheim. And then in the Waynesville, particularly in this Duceroy shale unit here, you get a very diverse, very well-preserved fauna. And elements of this are also found in the overlying Isotela shale in the upper part of the Waynesville and in the basal shales in the basal part of the Liberty Formation. In most places, as I mentioned, these nautiloids are preserved as stein currents representing mud and fillings of the cameral chambers that comprise the shells of these forms. The exception to this are the well-preserved specimens of Treptoceras and other nautiloids from the Ducerai shale. The typically aragonitic shells of these nautiloids are replaced by a pink-orange sparry calcite that preserves the key internal features of the siphuncle, including the connecting rings, the septal necks, the endosiphuncular deposits, and the cameral deposits.